Okay, everyone, welcome to Experience This Show 25. We should get an award. I think that's a quarter of a century, isn't it, guys? So here with some illustrious guests today. But I'm going to start with myself, Christian Watts at Magpie Travel, and over to Lori.
Hey everyone, good to be back for number 25. I'm Lori Timony with Virgin Experience Gifts.
And I'm Bruce Rosard, one of the co-founders of Arrival, and looking forward to this session all about trip planning.
Yeah, so trip planning, it's been in the news recently with TripAdvisor's new trip planning tool, their AI trip planning tool. So we reached out to a couple of hopefully experts in the space. So we have Jeff from Tripian. Want to do a quick intro, Jeff?
Hey, good afternoon. Thanks for having me on. I'm Jeff Kischuk, one of the co-founders of Tripian, and we really specialize in the in-destination trip planning component. So really looking forward to this talk.
And Lewis Krell. Lewis is not currently with the trip planning company, but has a bit of a history with trip planning. Lewis?
Yeah, absolutely. I think my claim to fame is I'm the only person dumb enough to join 2 trip planning startups. But honestly, I had pretty good experiences at both. I was with UTrip for a long time as one of the earliest employees that had, although I still believe should not have happened, one of the probably more public and disastrous failures. And then I joined Innsbruck. Actually, before UTrip went under, joined Innsbruck, which I think was the most spectacular exit and success story in this space. So I've kind of seen both sides of it, and although have not been in the industry for about 3 years, and I've worked with Christian, knew Christian, and was excited to join the discussion. Obviously have some thoughts about the space, so excited to join the conversation today.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Yeah, I want to go into the story a little bit, Lewis, with your history. It's always good to have a failure story, at least for people to learn from. But just so people understand what trip planning is, it's what is it, guys? The 36 websites that on average people go to book a trip, something like that, 30 something. We all know it, we've all done it. And that just causes millions of entrepreneurs to decide that travel is broken. And the only way to fix it is to create a trip planning tool that everyone will immediately use and will solve all the problems in one place all at once. And that's where we've had so many people come into the space, I believe. And up to now, it's been almost all bad endings, I think. But Lewis, can you give us a quick story of UTrip and then Innsbruck?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think UTrip was, I really do believe, I think it was still the best product that came out in this space, and expanded like most into B2B, started working with a lot of different DMOs in particular, some hotels, cruise lines, things of that nature. But it was personalized on the ground trip planning, really, complete itineraries. And then Innsbruck was very similar, but a lot more broad. So the content itself probably wasn't quite the same depth. UTrip actually had a lot of content creators and writers. Innsbruck was a lot more based on sourcing publicly available information. And Innsbruck also very much B2C. There was a more heavy emphasis on the actual traveler coming to Innsbruck.com. You could plan trips truly anywhere in the world, multi-city, multi-country, really, really long trips, whereas UTrip, I think's best focus was one specific destination, going a little bit deeper. Innsbruck also played in the B2B space, but primarily at the national tourism level. So we would work with places like, the countries, Brand USA was a client, Tourism Australia, Azerbaijan, Slovenia. So it would work primarily at that national level rather than the individual specific level.
Lewis, why would you say UTrip was one of the best, if not most successful? What makes you say that?
Well, I think I think the UI, the original UI was actually very useful and very helpful to how people plan trips. When I look at the TripAdvisor new AI, it looks somewhat similar. It takes a lot of those same things. So it's like nothing has really progressed that much in the last 8, 9, 10 years, it seems like. It still asks some of the same questions to get you that itinerary. So I just think UTrip was very early on in making a really user-friendly way to get personalized information. And then the depth that it went to was kind of second to none, although it was a huge detriment to scaling the organization, which I'm sure we'll get into a lot of why some of these things don't work. But the kind of intense detail that went into putting together every single city did make for a really good experience. It just probably didn't make for a really good long-term
I
business.
want to just follow up with one quick one, which is personalization, because in my mind, that is the biggest challenge of a good trip planning tool, because personalization is really freaking hard. How did UTrip do personalization?
I think it took into account a whole bunch of different factors, right? It was your things we've all heard: seasonality, geography, trying to actually take into account some logic in terms of maybe where your hotel is or where you're trying to go. So it actually cluster things around a certain location. I just, the idea of I could overemphasize if I said I'm really into food or I'm really into outdoor activities, to be able to more heavily recommend those. I know, the AI and just the technology has gotten exponentially stronger and better in the last 10 or so years. But at that time, I do think it actually took these things into consideration, whereas it seemed like most other attempts that I'd seen were a lot more surface level.
Yeah, I feel like every time I look at a trip planner, and obviously with TripAdvisor, it's very much in beta, so it's very limited. But I think you nailed it right there in regards to looking at the depth that you really need to be able to go into to actually function as a real trip planner. Right now, I go on TripAdvisor, I look at that, I can get that anywhere. That information I can get anywhere. And what they're asking me, like, oh, you like outdoor activities? That's so general, it's so generic. Like, what kind of outdoor activities do you like? And then they deliver, an itinerary is delivered back to you that I could easily get just by Googling, give me a 4-day itinerary in Boston that hits these highlights, bam, I'll get multiple itineraries. But I think that what's so complicated about this whole thing is, as you said, the depth that you really have to go into if you really want to nail all the different types of things that one person can do, and the amount of that effort that it takes to go from A to Z, the multi-cities, the accommodations, where you're staying, how far is that attraction from this. It's incredibly complicated. So interesting that you say that you think you nailed that. But
no,
that
didn't.
Also,
that
oh, you
I
didn't
wouldn't say
nail it.
I wouldn't say we nailed it. I would just say at the time, I think it was leaps and bounds better than what I had seen. And it just doesn't feel, and Jeff, I'm excited to hear more about, kind of what you guys are doing and how other companies maybe in the last couple of years have approached it. But I just feel like you haven't seen much progress. Like when I see the inputs to something like TripAdvisor's, it doesn't really look any different in the last 10 years. And honestly, the outputs don't really either. It seems like you take 10 trip plans. I watched Christian's demo, and if you took 10 trip planners and said, put in a trip to San Francisco, they'd all come out basically exactly what Christian did, regardless of who you personalize a little bit, but it just doesn't seem like the inputs or outputs are that different, despite the fact that it does seem like the technology itself is so much better.
So Lewis, I'm happy to vouch for you on the UTrip part of the trip planner. I do still think that was the best trip planner I've seen, even though it was a number of years ago now. I think I said that on the video as well. So on that note, Jeff, this is like one big introduction to you. We've all explained how these things failed, and you're still in the space. What makes you so special?
What makes us special is we're still here. So it's interesting that we considered UTrip our competitor back in 2018, 2019, and it was great having a competitor in the space. And like them, we really focused on the details of the in destination and that itinerary. But when we think of trip planners, and this is one of the areas where Tripian evolved where we did, and I'm going to take it back up. It's not only personalization, but it's personas. And it's making sure that me as a person, I travel differently for business than I do with my friends, than I do with my family. And my booking preferences are all different through those, whether I want to book direct with an airline, whether I'm looking for a cheapest flight. It's incredibly complicated. I think that's one thing we all know, that travel is incredibly complicated and full of legacy systems. Tripian, we specialize in a niche because of that complexity. We look to serve and provide tools up into that ecosystem. But I think a lot of the barriers in the trip planners are that complexity. And when we see GPT coming, trying to solve it, it's not going to solve those complexities. It kind of puts a mask and a veneer over it, Christian, like you've said many times, but it doesn't really solve the needs for a trip planner. And I would question to the group, will there ever be a super app? And your intro, Christian, you positioned it as a super app, one app to rule them all, but I don't see it. And I think it's going to be very disparate trip planners, maybe not 33, but maybe the average user will use 5 different trip planners. And I think that's the real interesting challenge in creating ecosystems where there's different collaboration between tool sets, sharing data between user experiences, and having a more seamless experience between 4 or 5 trip planners that make it easier for the user, not thinking there's going to be one super app. That's just my hot take.
It's like a whole different definition of what a trip planning tool is, because that's not a trip planning tool the way U-Trip or some of the others, they want to be the trip planner, right? So I'd love to dig into your thought on that in a little bit. Anyone have a question or thought, what the hell are you talking about putting 4 trip planning tools together? Like, how is that different than 4 websites?
I mean,
Yeah.
Sorry, Jeff, go ahead. I was just going to comment that, it's funny that you brought that up, Jeff, because today I was looking at your website, then I was looking at a few others, and I was saying, it's interesting because when I saw your website, I said, okay, well, it seems more they're focusing on tours and activities and kind of the what do you do's, and then you look at TripAdvisor, and that's 100% what they're focusing on, right? They haven't brought any accommodations into the mix at all. It's all about, I want to go here and what should I do? And we all know that it's one thing to think about, okay, I want to go to a destination. What should I do in that destination? And what are some of the cool things I can do? But then you start bringing in accommodations. That's a whole different ball of wax. And I almost started feeling exactly as you said, that that whole idea of a connected trip, that's insane. Right? That's insane if you look at all of the things that are involved from the minute you leave your house until the minute you return. And the fact of the matter is that if you really want to bring in accommodations, and especially if they start getting into like house rentals and things of that nature, you are going to need to use several different avenues for collecting that information. And while you might be able to slim down those 36 websites, I mean, that's really the goal, right? It's to slim down the 36 websites. It's to say, okay, maybe here's where I look for where I'm going to go and what the cool things are to do. Here's where I look where I'm going to stay. But then you still have to put them all together. So, anyway, that's just interesting that you brought that up.
Well, I think we can parallel it into other industries, and it's all about user-based requirements and finding that usability. Like for banking, for example. That's like saying there's going to be a super bank, a super app where everybody has one bank account, one debit card, one credit card, only one payment method. But, everybody has multiple payment methods, multiple cards, and they organize those and they juggle them even when they travel. They'll use different payment methods depending on it. So humans can tolerate some complexity, but it just needs to be in a type of ecosystem they can manage that, to your point, Lori, is more convenient than 36. And I think in travel, the example that I think of personally is I like to book direct with airlines, just from my experience and knowing what I travel in the industry. When you book direct, I tend to think I get better service, better rerouting, better cancellation notifications. So a trip planner, to me, if it had a collaboration that allowed me to kick out and do a single sign-on into my carrier and allow me to facilitate that booking, then get the PRN file back into one place where I'm managing my travel information, that is pretty cool because I can still have my personal choices and you're just making the experience and the connectivity between systems a little more seamless.
Well,
So
this is really well, Chris,
Sorry,
I was going to say it's interesting because like this is just showing how things have changed, at least in my mind. Is Jeff's the biggest bull on the call, and he's not pitching the super app, right? And I think that's a big change because there's been so many entrepreneurs and people who said this is the one-stop shop, I can do everything. And I think what I've seen and what I've learned is if you're building a trip planner for a specific use case, it absolutely can be done, right? There's if U-Trip had decided, and I think I honestly don't know enough about this, but I remember there's a company called Visit Widget that did trip planners for DMOs specifically. And I think they have like 200 plus clients and like 5 employees, right? So you could go build a lifestyle business. They clearly have found something that works for their one specific client base. And as far as I know, they've never gone out and said, we are a one-stop shop for absolutely everything, right? And I think YouTrip could have done that times 100, right? It was a significantly better product, at least in my opinion. So there is a way you can build a trip planner that solves a lot of issues for a specific market. If you want to build the absolute best hotel trip planner, I think it can be done. And I think the new technology exists. And if you want, but the super app concept is really, really difficult. So I think, with the DMO or an NTO, they're not trying to make money, right? They are, but they're not a for-profit business. And I think there's also ways where even with Innsbruck being acquired by Klarna, which, once again, as far as I know, is the most successful exit, right? Everyone made money, shareholders made money, everyone kept jobs. It was a multiple, acquisition that came at a pretty good multiple. But I don't think Klarna bought it because they thought this was going to make us a ton of new money. They saw it as kind of top of funnel. This is a great way to get people into our ecosystem, not as a way to just be a super app for everybody. So Jeff, I just think it's really interesting because like 5 years ago, anyone I talked to in the space was like, we're the one-stop shop. We can do everything. And I think maybe finally there's been a big enough graveyard where people are like, maybe we can't do that. So I don't know, but it's just interesting to hear you say that.
Hi, it's Marika from the Von Mack Agency here with your Tourism Marketing Half Minute. You know what's a real thing? Decision fatigue. And if you're throwing too much at your audience, you may be leaving sales on the table. According to a study by the University of Utah, consumers are more likely to make a purchase when presented with fewer choices. The study found that when consumers were presented with 24 options, they were only 20% likely to actually make a purchase. But when they were presented with only 6, that likelihood shot up. So assess your brand's website, brochure, and materials. Pick a lead product and make sure that everything else is listed clearly without competing values. It'll help boost your ROAs and your bottom line.
So Christian, sorry, I'm sure you have a number of things you want to say, but I have a couple things that are just, I gotta say, and ask about. No, because there's too much floating around here. Super apps. I think that is such an overused word in travel where, when we were in Bangkok, at Arrival Bangkok, we heard about the real super apps, starting with WeChat, which is really still the super app of the world, and then Grab in Southeast Asia. And we learned about a few others that are taking off in China. But a true super app has to include communication like WeChat does, and all the payments and everything that is almost like Amazon plus Expedia plus Uber plus fintech versus the company here that wants to be a travel super app like Hopper is specifically a travel super app. So I don't even like the word super app with Hopper, right? They're just a diversified travel company, which is kind of what Uber is now going to become. And I would put my money on Uber ahead of Hopper in that game, and we'll see what happens there. So that's my comment on super apps. The other comment regarding trip planning, which I thought we were going to talk about, trip planning tools for tours and activities. And what you've done really quickly, Jeff, is said, no, we can go beyond tours and activities, which is what confused me with multiple. You're like, no, my trip planning tool is tours and activities, it's hotels, it's air, etc. And that makes sense if it can be integrated accordingly. So I think that's something worth us talking about. And I want to add one more thing, and I want to ask people questions. You mentioned who said the connected trip? Who mentioned the connected trip?
Lori?
Me.
So who is the guy who loves to talk about the connected trip? Probably the most successful CEO in the travel industry today is
Glenn Fogel.
Glenn Fogel, CEO of Booking.com. And you can't listen to him talk without him talking about the connected trip. And every time I hear it, I'm like, this guy is so smart and so successful. Get off the connected trip. Like, it's not gonna happen. Just because I book a hotel room with Booking.com does not mean I'm gonna book my food tour in Barcelona on Booking.com. They don't even source their own inventory. So just had to give you that rant. I'm done.
Well, you're wrong not to have that as a goal. Booking.com's done a terrible job of connecting a trip, as has Expedia, who also has talked about that forever. It's a good goal. It's the way to increase the frequency and get good branding in destination, but they've just done a terrible job and they don't even contract directly. So yeah, they're going to fail. But it's not that they shouldn't go towards that. I think it's a good goal. But
They're half-assing it, right? Like we've heard from Expedia for 10 years. We know that you're staying in a hotel in London. We booked your flight. You know what? Party of four. We know you're a family and not a business traveler. When you land, we're going to show you experiences that are customized, personalized for your current travel persona. Sounds great.
Yeah, they never did it. They never succeeded, and now they're further away from it than they ever were. But But let's talk about that. So they failed at connecting the trip. We all agree that, I think. Most trip planners, except for maybe Innsbruck, to this date, have not had good exits yet. Jeff's still working towards his exit. But U-Trip, I said before, was my favorite trip planner. Was that market conditions, Lewis, that caused that to fail, or was that other reasons, maybe finance or internal or something else? Could they have made it?
Yeah. Well, it depends on what could look like. We'll have to get a beer and I'll go deeper into it. But I will say, right, I think that was kind of bringing up that Visit Widget example. If U-Trip had decided to stay really focused on B2B and work at what we're really good at, the company would absolutely still be around today. But I don't see any scenario where there was going to be a scale, right? Like a real scale to that company where it was consumer facing and millions of people were using it and you could travel anywhere in the world. We were very far away from that. So I guess it just kind of depends on what the end goal is. Yeah, so we'll get a beer and we'll go deeper, but it certainly did not need to end at the time that it did or in the way that it did. But it was also very far away from, that one app to rule them all.
Funny that you say if it had remained B2B, because I do remember pitching you in Starbucks that you should do a B2C version, and that was definitely where the future is.
You're a
Well, I just think, Ray, that's one of the big difficulties, and maybe Jeff is going to solve it. But B2C, one of the reasons why a TripAdvisor, a Booking, and Expedia, like their big advantage is I cannot go to their website and get no result, right? I can put in anywhere in the world. I can put in just something, and at least I'll get something. And what I find with a lot of these trip planners is if I want to do something reasonably normal, right? Maybe I want to go from London to Barcelona to Paris, and it can't do that, right? Or I want to go to some place that's a little bit off the beaten path and there's 2 results. It's just not that helpful. And I think that's a big struggle for a lot of these companies that AI is going to help solve. And a lot of these things are going to help solve. But now the other issue becomes I'm plugging into the same data sources as absolutely everybody. So like, what is my competitive advantage? What can I do differently if my website gives you the exact same content as the next website, as the next website, as the next website? Yeah, we'll get a beer.
Well, yeah. Well, one more question on that, and I want to go back to Jeff. But were people using it? You were selling B2B, I think, mostly through DMOs. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah.
Were you getting traction on the tool over time?
Yeah, absolutely. Through the DMO websites, and you go to New York City or Las Vegas and San Francisco. We're working with all the biggest cities in the country, and those websites have a lot of traffic and a good amount of usage. So I think people were quite happy. It certainly delivered that single destination focus, trying to plan a trip, especially to the level of what I'm really trying to do is market this city. We weren't on U-Trip without a DMO website. The goal was not to convert you, right? We were hoping that was going to happen, but people didn't hire us saying our KPI is 5,000 hotel rooms booked, right? Our KPI was just people spent a lot of time on the site. They were really, interacting. They were learning a lot. So I think, yes, reasonably happy clients, really high retention rates. So that part of the business, I'd say, was quite successful. It just was not the end goal of the company.
So you built a fun, sticky game for websites to hopefully hold some traffic in place to allow them to report good results as far as time on site. But for trip planners to work, it's fine to stay B2B, but somebody on the other end of that is going to go B2C. Do they need to succeed with it? Or all these other goals and this is for Jeff now, I guess, is B2C going to work? Or is it just a nice kind of fun tool to play with to keep people on the site, to build up some nice branding in destinations or on an airline brand or something else?
Well, and that's the kind of the neat transition, right? Then when we talk about trip planners, as Bruce said, it needs to be defined in the context. And that's where we, totally agree with Lewis that it needs to be use case, user driven. At Tripian, where we look at it and where we really focus on the B2B is just like you were saying, Christian, there's changes, and by B2B, we want to make sure that we provide tools and the trip planning tools to help brands, to help companies, travel companies, whether they be transportation or hospitality companies who have members, who have guests, who have travelers under management, and they want to provide them additional services. And we're hearing more talk about airlines wanting to own the brand and own the guest experience. We're knowing hotels are trying to take that back, including direct booking. So, there's a competition for those Cs, and there's a competition for what environment those customers are going to operate into. So where we're finding traction and interest is in some of the larger travel brands, hospitality brands who want to retain those travelers. And they want to do that by helping them engage in their local activities, local experiences, and provide them more with selling them a ticket and selling them booking a room. So we believe, and that's the position we're taking and strongly focusing on B2B, is helping those brands retain their customers through providing the additional experiences and trip planning tools.
Isn't
Which I
that
think
what
you can
Viator's
get.
trying to do with their B2B?
Sorry?
Sorry, Lori. Isn't that what Viator and other OTAs are doing with their
Sure.
B2B programs?
Believe so.
What's different? What's different?
Again, it's accessibility. It's our, some of the smaller hotel brands or some of the more regional airlines going to partner with those tool platforms for their B2B. I think we all know, we've all done the exercise on the TAM, SAM, SOM of travel. We believe that there's, large enough market and opportunities. And again, it's all use case driven, different users, different needs, different businesses have different interests and partnerships. So we believe there's still plenty of opportunity for companies like Tripian to solve and service in that B2B space and be nimble and be effective and really provide that, service for those companies to advance.
Where does Tripian source its product for tours and activities?
Currently, right now, we've been working with Get Your Guide, Viator, Amusement TUI. Working through Arrival, we're really trying to understand how do we work with different aggregators, different providers? How can we provide a facilitation for those additional bookings to help some of the smaller direct? One of the areas we're seeing more pickup in is people wanting those more authentic experiences, more locals, local guides. And it's really just trying to help and be part of that ecosystem and be a distribution channel for smaller providers and smaller distributors to get into some of these other markets. So we look at Tripian being able to be that bridge, being able to be that conduit, and we want to be able to work with some of the aggregators and channel managers that can bring those smaller activities and tours. And we see that particularly, we're doing some really interesting work in some emerging economies and some destinations that, are being challenged and wanting to maintain their authenticity, both in terms of tours, activities, merchants, crafts. And some of those smaller areas we're working to bridge, tourists to get those smaller out of the way experiences and be more local. And that's something some of the big aggregators don't necessarily play in as well.
But
I still
Bruce,
think.
I think you mentioned before TripAdvisor. Sorry, like one second. I got to pick on Bruce for a second. You mentioned TripAdvisor, and then you talk about Viator inventory. This is not about selling tours and activities. The vast majority of activities on a trip planner should be free or non-tours and activities. I get that we're in this space, but most of the stuff you do when you go to a place is walk through the plaza with the fountain, right? That should be primary on a trip planner. The tours and products can come later, but and Google talks about that. Most travel is the free stuff.
Yeah, that's
Sorry,
a great point. No, that's a great point. And yeah, that's fair enough to point at me and say, you forgot that point. So thanks for reminding me. And then we're talking about trip planners, and we started off by talking about Trip's new AI generated trip planner. And then I say, well, all that data is available in Google. What do I need TripAdvisor's trip planner for? Let's let Lori ask a question, because We
No, I
bolted it
suppose
together.
that's just a matter of condensing the information, but it's not to say that you can't get it condensed elsewhere. I'm just thinking that, what is the goal, right? What is the goal of a trip planner? That's the question, because there's so many ways of carving up this concept of a trip planner. You're talking about tours and activities and potentially bringing in local experiences. And we know we can get that in other avenues. Looking at accommodations and accommodations that are apart from, big hotel chains. Again, we know we can get that. We can get it condensed, right? We can get it through various OTAs. When I think about trip planners, and, we're looking here at, are there successful trip planners? Well, there's a whole space of trip planners we're not even talking about here. And that is packaged travel, right? And there's a zillion opportunities for people that are, independent travelers to buy pre-packaged or pre-organized experiences that are multi-city destinations, that include air, that include meals if you want or not. And these are done by people that are experts in the area, that know it, that come up with great ideas. And I can promise you that, honestly, when I was out there doing all kinds of trip planning, I was always looking at the competition. That's where I was getting my best ideas in some cases. So you've got the opportunity to grab an amazing experience from any number of different companies that are already selling all this stuff. And so I do think that that's worth mentioning, because that is really a trip that is planned for you, and by, honestly, people that know the area very well. But the other thing I want to mention just quickly is, the other thing that we're not talking about is the fact that people who are really engaging in trip planning, and I'm not talking about that person that's going 7 nights to the Caribbean and laying on the beach and that's it, or the person that's traveling for business. People that are engaging in trip planning, they also love it. That's part of the journey. That's part of the excitement, is pulling in all the different information. And it's an emotional experience that starts right from the scratch. And I think that that's an important thing to think about. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why this is going to be a very hard thing for us to crack, because the people that are really trip planning, they're doing it because they want to do it.
Well, I think, and I thought that was really interesting when Christian initially posted his review. That was probably the most common comment and sentiment, which is people forget that part of the joy of travel is the planning, it is that discovery, and it is the anticipation of the trip. So, and also, this is like a little bit of a tangent, but especially after the Klarna acquisition, I just feel like I had a lot of young entrepreneurs that were reaching out and said, look at oh my God, you worked at 2 trip planners. Like, so what do you learn, or what's kind of your advice? And one of the in addition to don't forget that trip planning is actually kind of enjoyable, right? It's probably not as broken as you think that it is. But the other is that you need to be good at something when you start the company. So what I mean by that is, so many trip planning companies and travel startups in general are the person who had one experience when they traveled, or they're 23 years old and they have all the time in the world to travel. So this is all that they think about, when that's not the average traveler. So I think Jeff's a great example of this. Like, Anoop was the CEO of an Innsbruck. Anoop worked for 25 years at Oracle and eBay, and he's an insanely talented developer and engineer. So he loved travel and he had this great skill set. And I feel like every success story I've ever seen in travel is, I am really good at marketing and I love travel. I am really good at sales and I love travel. Every success story kind of has the same thread, which is, I love travel and I had a problem. I was like, but are you
fail problem? Every fail.
Yes, every failed story.
Oh, I love to travel, so I'm going to get into the business.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This is my passion. I love to do it. I have no other real discernible skill other than I experienced a problem once. So I should now start a company to solve my specific problem, forgetting that, especially in trip planning, once again, just reiterate, but it's not nearly as broken as you think, because when you talk to most people, they had one bad experience or they wish this was better, but they probably enjoyed planning. They probably enjoyed their trip. They probably shared all their pictures. They probably talked about it when they got home. They probably had a pretty good trip overall. And that's why people love travel, because, like, even when something goes wrong, the experience as a whole was probably really enjoyable. And I think people forget that sometimes when they think like, this is broken, this is broken, this is broken. It's like, might not be.
And I really don't want a trip planning tool to plan my entire day or a week. Okay, do this, this, and this, like the experience that you showed us, Christian, of the TripAdvisor AI trip planning tool. Well, first go here, then go here, then go here, based on what it thinks my preferences are, because it depends when I wake up and when my family wakes up and what they want to do. And, you know, then we'll just look. And that's just my own opinion. I want to throw one other brand out there that, you know, I don't know enough about Inspirock. Are they even still a trip planning tool? I can't really find them.
Yeah, you can access it on I think it's called Klarna Trips now.
Yeah, I looked at Klarna. I saw, anyway, I'll check that out. You want to know another? So there's a graveyard of trip planning tools for the last 20 years, right? Like you guys at UTrip, you were at Focusrite and did the Tourism Innovation Summit, Travel Innovation Summit, and you put UTrip out there, and there were hundreds of companies that did that, dozens, I'll say. There is one other brand that I will put out there as maybe one of the most successful trip planning tools, and their exit. There was one out there called Trip.com, and their claim to fame when they started was, we're going to pull from your social graph and we're going to find recommendations from your friends on Facebook and your reviews that you share with them. And we're going to help to create a trip plan based on your social graph. And that sounded like a really cool idea. Turned out it sucked. And they then sold the URL to Ctrip, you know, the largest OTA in China, which then rebranded for all their out of China business as Trip.com. To me, that was a really successful outcome for that brand, creating Trip.com. What's that?
Obviously, that doesn't count, but
I know it obviously doesn't count. I'm making fun of it, right? I'm sure the investors didn't cash out at all, but at least the brand name still lives and is huge. And you know, I was thinking about Watson. I mean, Watson was really the first AI trip planning tool, right? I mean, it was IBM's Watson computer. Terry Jones, founder of Travelocity, came together to create a true AI trip planning tool. How long did that last? A couple of years? Not long. Probably one of your big competitors, because their market was DMOs, right?
Yep.
You know, I don't
So
know.
why don't we talk about what might actually work, right? So I know we only have a couple minutes. Why don't we end on a positive note for Jeff? Because we've been beating up the whole thing the whole time. So maybe we talk about, you know, personally, my point of view is that you got to carve it up, just like, you know, you had talked a little bit about, Jeff. You got to carve it up, find out what, you know, where the most value lies, and go from there. But I don't think that whole connected trip thing is a reality, really. And I don't think that it's, that's kind of my point of view. I still think we're going to have to carve it up in a number of different ways. But anyway, that's someone else.
No, I've got a two-part question, and I'm going to come back to you, Lori, as well. So the two-part question to end on, well, first of all, you haven't allowed me to talk about AI at all. But the future is AI agents that with you as you walk around a destination as well. But that aside,
and as I told you, just real quickly, I told you in your comment, when you give me an AI agent, which is coming, right? And you've clarified that is coming, and that AI agent truly knows who I am, and it saves it, right? It's not like ChatGPT where every chat's new, it doesn't know who I am, and it truly knows who I am, and it can start to build my personas. And I can say, okay, today I'm traveling just with my wife, right? And we're going to go on blah, blah, blah. And it knows me. Then I see it as being possible. Okay, sorry to interrupt, Christian.
of course it knows you. It's your agent. This is your agent that lives on your phone and knows everything about you more than you know. But anyway, that's coming. So two-part question is there a $1 billion, let's say in 5 years, is there a $1 billion company in this space that we will start as a search top of the funnel? So when you think, I'm going to go to Rome next month, will we all go to a website called abctravel.com, which is a trip planner, and there's a space there where a company will be worth more than $1 billion. That's part one. If there is a success in the space, if you're running, and one of you is if you're CEO of a trip planner today, what would you do differently? And let's make that a short response. Would you do B2B, B2C? top of funnel, how would you make this work where it hasn't worked before? And we'll finish with Jeff, because Jeff is one. So I'm going to start with you, Bruce. So first of all, yes or no on the $1 billion company? Second of all, what would you do?
In 5 years, the only way there's a $1 billion company is if one of the current big guys can take advantage of one of these soon-to-be agents that AI creates, and can invest a ton of cash to make that a reality, and really become, in my mind, like the next Get Your Guide or the next Viator on steroids.
So like a WeWork scenario, you take $10 billion of investment and you build a $1 billion company. Yeah.
Hopefully
Lori.
not. No, I mean, I think there is the potential for that. Again, without knowing how the agents will work, but imagining it, then I think there's potential.
Okay, Lori, same.
I think there's potential if your AI agent can offer the same level of service as a travel agent can offer, that can literally build a trip start to finish, exactly the way that it would be done if you're working with a travel agent. I don't know if I'm assuming that we think that's possible. I know you do, Christian. And if that can happen, then I think there is a $1 billion company out there.
Except the travel agent knows
possible.
about every single tour activity experience in the world,
Yeah,
and has a one-click link to book, right? Like,
it might not have to be a one-click link to book
if you
that
wanna be a
travel agent,
$1
because
billion
if you've got an assistant there, if they have to run around and do all the work for you, right? That's what travel agents do. That's
Lori,
going to be done much faster.
Did you get a new sponsor who's like a travel agent from 1985 that you're trying to promote?
No, I just, you know what, I definitely was born in the old school travel, traditional travel. And I still think that a lot of people that are in this space of online travel don't really understand the value of and how important that it really is. I still think it's the roots of everything. And I think that it's, a lot of times we just don't talk about that.
All right, good. Lewis, same questions.
Yeah, I'll be brief. Exactly what Bruce said, word for word.
thank you, Lewis. Now I owe you a beer.
Okay. Can you give us one lesson though from you, Trip? I don't care about any internal stuff if there was, but what is market conditions or direction? What's one lesson that you would have done differently from you, Trip?
I think I would have stayed with it, right? Stick with what's working. Sometimes I'll say this, you can't reverse engineer an acquisition. You need to actually have a good product. You need to actually have users. You need to have a business. There has to be something in it. Why in a company, if your goal is acquisition, which ours was, you need to build something somebody wants, right? And I think we probably got way too far down the road of how can we reverse engineer something that people might want, rather than focusing on what people actually want and actually use. So if you are a founder, if you are a builder, and this is true of any category, keep your people happy, right? Like if you find something that works, go deeper into that. It might take you more time than you want, but the end result will be much more successful than trying to fast forward to get to something you think other people want rather than what the data is telling you.
Yeah, that's
one thing there, Christian. I'm sorry, because this is really interesting. You went to a different topic of building a company for acquisition, which a lot of people, startups, always are thinking about exit strategies. I heard a really great line very recently where great companies aren't sold, they're bought. That was, to me, really, really interesting, right? Like,
yeah,
you can't build
someone
a company
comes to get
planning to sell it. You have to build a company and then they will come buy it, right? I thought that was really, really interesting. I think that's kind of what you were saying.
Exactly right. Yeah, people get bought because they're wanted, right? They don't get bought because you hope to get bought.
Right. Yeah.
Especially if you've got one target acquirer. I think too many companies are like, I'm building this and Uber's going to buy me in 5 years. And
right. Yeah.
They forget what happens if Uber doesn't. But anyway, Jeff, we're gonna finish with your answers to this question.
Oh, that's pretty crazy. So I think the answer to is there going to be a $1 billion company in 5 years? I'd going to hedge it and say there might be, but they won't be the only one. So kind of echoing what Bruce said, and there won't be the only one just because I think the market is so fragmented. As Lewis said, there's so many different users, use cases, and that kind of ties into the answer I'm going to give about the D2C, B2B, would I do anything different? It's, part of it is the complexity and the, flexibility in changing customers and consumers. Their tastes change, their needs change. Acquiring those customers is very expensive, very difficult. So with that in mind, that's one of the reasons we pivoted, a few times to make sure that Tripian stayed B2B so that we can provide services to maybe that large billion-dollar company that's growing, because the acquisition costs for a small trip planner, and it'd be interesting, Lewis, to know what you found at UTrip is exorbitant. There's just so much competition for that customer, but providing services to a larger brand that has the customers or can acquire them is where we want to fit.
Yeah, and I'd say that's the number one reason I've always heard for these things failing is cost of customer acquisition. Absolutely.
What's your answer to your question, Christian?
Well, my question was about the trip planning tool being $1 billion company. I'd say no, not today's type of trip planning tool. An AI agent trip plan, which might just be a bit more of a generic AI agent. Absolutely, there's space. So in the next 5 years, I think it'll skip right over the trip planning part, and that'll be one little task that the AI agent can do.
Like the AI agent is the trip planner or the travel agent of the future, right? Like I think that could be super interesting. We should build that. What do you guys think?
I think that's nice.
Yeah, it's what
I was getting a lot of grief about travel agents, but I'm pretty sure that's what I said.
No, but it's not. This is a real-time agent, right? So I'm walking down the street, I'm going through Chinatown. It knows I'm going through Chinatown. It knows it's 12 o'clock. It knows I talked about this place last week when I was on Instagram. It's a real-time feeding in, and it'll constantly update with what's going on your trip, rather than sit down and print out a 3-day itinerary that the travel agent does.
Yeah, I don't think that's
really,
in 5
really
years.
simple application that I just talked to a guy yesterday who has his website is something like dollar off drinks, whatever.com, and it's in Orlando, and we're talking about doing something when Arrival Orlando happens in October. And he's like, you go to a bar, you go to a main street, and you have the application on your phone, not even an app. You can just have it downloaded as a web app. And it's geofenced. So when you walk by a bar that's on his program, you get a notification that Joe's Bar will give you $1 off any drink. It's just a notification as you walk by. Like that's an agent telling you, come get a drink for $1 off. Like that's the beginning of this kind of thing where your agent is just telling you what you want to know based on what you have on your phone, right? I mean,
which happens all the time right now. When you're in a destination, you're getting push notifications from all kinds of different people that know you're there and want to sell you stuff.
Right. So it just has to get organized by your agent. Yeah.
Bruce, did you get sponsored by a new guy trying to sell you?
Say again? What?
Don't worry about it. Hey, excellent.
Yes,
thank you guys for joining. Lots more to come on this, I am sure. And really appreciate you guys' time today.
Thank you guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Great conversation. Really appreciate it.
Bye.
It was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
Okay. Take care.